Yeah. Um, Hi, my name is Lyzi Diamond. I'm a 2014 Code for America Fellow with the City of Lexington, and here with Danny and Jason, and they'll introduce themselves in a second. But before we get started, we're going to talk about maps. All of you like maps, probably. So if you take a look at this map up here, this is a map of San Francisco, and this is real crime data from May 31st of this year. This is all of the SFPD incident responses from that day. And looking at this map, you can kind of notice some patterns, maybe because it was a Saturday, I don't know. But you can see a concentration of them in one particular area. And you see other areas that have fewer crimes. And if you actually look at 9th and Howard, where we are right now, there's one right on the corner. It was a stolen vehicle. Hopefully none of yours. So with this data, this is public government data, and city agencies all the time are looking at data like this and using it to make decisions. GIS data, geographic data, is the majority of public government data that exists in the open data space. So it's no surprise that over the years, Code for America teams have more and more built applications that rely on maps and map data. So we thought it would be good to chat a little bit about maps and their value in Code for America projects. And we all come from a little bit of a different space, so hopefully we'll have an interesting conversation. And now Danny's going to talk.
Hello everyone, I'm Danny Whalen. I'm working with the Charlotte team this year, and we are doing a lot of development with open geodata and also open source geographic tools, and I'm excited to talk about that.
My name is Jason Denizac, and I'm with the Chattanooga team this year. We've been getting into a lot of open source mapping technologies this year. I personally don't come from a geo background. I come from a policy background, and I'm a web developer. So it's been really interesting for me coming into the fellowship, getting a chance to explore some of these tools and really learning more about what's happening and how some of these technologies are being used in our cities. And I'm excited to talk about this a little bit. One of the things that I take from my policy background is maybe an intuitive understanding of the degree to which location affects policy, that policy is implemented and takes place in the real world, in our cities. And I think that's one of the things that's really excited about working at the municipal level with local governments, is being able to see kind of full circle a policy come from the initial idea stage, or maybe starting with an actual problem that you could see in your community, and trying to figure out what some of these policy solutions are, playing with some of these different scenarios, and actually following through to implementation on the ground and seeing maybe a new bike lane being put in place or an improvement in a local park. I'm excited to talk about some of the technologies and tools that can maybe help some of that implementation.
So just to sort of kick it off, what are some of the challenges that both of you have faced in either in February or doing research with your communities that have a geographic element where you thought, oh, a map or map-related thing might be a potential solution for this? And also, what are the challenges in actually implementing that coming from your background?
I think the first challenge is understanding the data and how it relates to the city, and part of doing that is actually getting a hold of the data first. That's the key piece there. And we've been able to do that, and sort of my background is in web development, but you start out doing things like geocoding and reverse geocoding, and that's your first intro to anything geographic. And then you start to put things on maps, and you learn about client-side mapping tools like Leaflet and things like that. And then it grows, and then the back-end component comes into play, and you have to analyze that data and piece it together. That's really where we are in our projects, taking disparate data sets and figuring out what they mean when composed together and visualized. And I think that's really what we've been doing so far.
I'd like to echo that. Finding geographic data to use and to analyze has been a challenge. I think that the systems that store a lot of this data don't necessarily, or historically haven't, made it easy to share that data in a raw form that can be analyzed or really accessed, certainly by the average citizen, and even other people within city government haven't had ready access to that. You know, in our residency month in February, we sat in on a city planning meeting, the planning commission, and there were some technical staff that were helping the planning board with the different proposals that were brought to them that were basically using the software and having direct access to these geographic systems and printing it out to hand to the council. And the council and the people who were making the decisions directly really had no direct access to manipulate or see any of the data, and the people in the audience certainly didn't have that kind of access. So being able to get to the information in the first place has been a significant hurdle. And then beyond that, just kind of coming to terms with what types of analysis can be done. How can you visualize this information? How do you make sense of and compare different data sets, and what is kind of the range of possibilities there? One of the things I learned is that the term for that is spatial analysis, and being able to understand how different data sets affect each other. But I think that could be a challenge, maybe certainly in terms of presenting geographic information to the general public, is conveying a sense of kind of what is important and then kind of providing hints about how to interpret it rather than just putting it up on a map.
And that definitely gets to one of the other challenges, which is, I come from a GIS and spatial analysis background, and there's two pieces of that that are difficult. One is communicating generally about why a certain type of analysis is valuable versus another type of analysis. There's a big tendency when you see map data or data that has addresses to just put it on a map. Everyone wants to put everything on a map, and the governments want these web pages with a map that has every possible piece of data that you could ever want and the ability to turn them on and turn them off, when sometimes you have to decide which pieces of data are most valuable for telling a specific story or finding out specific information, and a lot of map data can be overwhelming. And so that can be, like, it speaks to what you're talking about, where, you know, it's easier to just print a paper map and give it to someone than have to walk through the technology with people who are unfamiliar with it.
Some of the initial analysis problems that we ran into were pretty simple. Intersections, you have different geometries, and you need to know which ones intersect things, and then finding a bounding box so that you can draw a map around the appropriate area. Another piece that comes into play is actually building a user interface around this data, where you need to take input through a map and then store it back in a server and retrieve it and post it again. I think that sort of CRUD pattern is an interesting one and goes beyond because you don't have the data to start with. I think that's where a lot of the tutorials you see around spatial analysis is assume that you have some data set to work with, but what about the process of creating and updating those data sets and then doing the analysis? And I think that's been one of the more interesting parts of what I've been doing this year.
I was reading an interview this morning with Amber Case in the latest issue of Model View Culture Quarterly, and one of the things she mentioned was this incredible kind of new generation of mappers, of people coming into these technologies, specifically around web mapping, being able to visualize data sets and access and manipulate and analyze geographic information and the effect that might have. I'm interested, Lyzi, in what are your thoughts around kind of the future or future trends of democratizing access to geographic information?
It's actually really interesting. I wrote a paper in college about sort of the advent of GIS, geographic information systems. And in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a big fear among the municipal planning community that this technology was going to remove people from the process who didn't understand the technology. They weren't going to be able to adequately give their opinions and make decisions because they didn't understand the tech. And at that time, the technology was very difficult to understand. And now, as time has gone on, and it's easier and easier to make a map, you can go onto Google Maps or Mapbox or ArcGIS Online and really easily add data to a map and print it out or embed it in your website or share it on Facebook. And that is super valuable for decision making. You end up with projects, several project like Nextdoor, where you can say, hey, the Nextdoor asks you, what is your neighborhood? Like, well, what would you consider to be your neighborhood? And that sort of technology is really allowing people to get back into that map game. That is helping to push forward decision making and have a voice in that, which is very cool. And I think that as civic technologists, one of the things that we can do around geographic data and maps is to continue to build out those interfaces, making it easier and easier to interact with geographic data by doing the hard work of pulling it out of the locations where it's sort of hidden away in these big systems, which is super challenging for sure. What tools, coming from your backgrounds, what tools do you use either from a conceptual level or from a practical physical level to do the work? What does a civic technologist need in their toolkit to do map work?
I think there's a couple key pieces. You need some type of library that deals with geographic data, and then you need some type of data store to hold that data and be able to query it spatially. And then the visualization piece comes in on the client side, and I think those are sort of the three key pieces.
I think the most important tool you need is a community, a learning community of other people who can make some of these concepts and help break it down and make it accessible. Because there really is a whole vocabulary around mapping and geographic things and things like spatial joins and geocoding and what do these words even mean and who invented them. And if you're just kind of diving into it on your own, just you and a search box, that could be a little intimidating. And it could be hard to figure out what's important and what to pay attention to. And then on top of that, there's so many open source tools coming out on such a quick basis. You need some sort of frame or context to put this in. And so having other people to go through the data with you, I think, is incredibly important.
And Lyzi, she's very helpful.
If only there were a time for mapping, perhaps a map time where people could get together and learn about maps. I don't know, that might be cool. Alex, wait, hold on.
Lyzi, could you just brag a little bit about map time? I think it's been something that really has been incredibly useful for me coming into GIS. It's brand new, and it's this thing that is about a year old and has spread just incredibly rapidly to a lot of cities across the country and elsewhere so far. And I think the incredible rate of growth, I'm speaking of MapTime, which is a community of learners for mapping and geographic information. The rate of growth, I think, speaks to this kind of need or interest in the general public or certain parts of the general public to have more geographic literacy. I mean, if you think about how much more often we're looking at and interacting maps, especially on our phones these days, to get directions or to better interact with the world around us. I think more people are kind of having their interest piqued in maybe becoming producers of maps instead of just passive consumers. So kudos on map time.
I didn't start it, but I'm helping to incubate it. And we have just about a minute left, and I know that Alex wanted us to set aside time if anyone had any burning questions about maps and civic tech that they wanted to ask. We could probably answer like one. If anybody has one. Yeah.
So I'm curious how you've dealt with the idea of neighborhood. So there's obviously the easy one about the data is available for a census tract, for example, and then there's how you define it as a person. What is your neighborhood? And what have you done with that at all?
some cities have an official neighborhood data set. Some have registered neighborhood associations. Lexington has registered neighborhood associations, but they overlap and they don't encompass the whole city. It really, I think, depends on the city. Some have ability to allow you to draw your own neighborhood. Sometimes it's colloquial. You want to say anything in 2 seconds?
Thank you very much, everyone.